The village of Arroyo was quiet most of the time, but not when it came to gossip. Mara had learned that early. Since she was a child, whispers followed her like shadows. They said she was unlucky. That she could never bear children. That she was cursed. Mara had heard every version of the story, some cruel, others disguised as pity, but they all hurt the same. At 22, she carried the weight of her family's disappointment like a stone in her chest. Mara lived with her parents and two older brothers in a small adobe house at the edge of the village. Her brothers had married early, bringing brides who were fertile and cheerful. Mara had endured the awkward questions from relatives during gatherings, the size of her parents when they thought she wasn't listening. She tried to ignore it, but the constant judgment wore her down. She longed for respect, for a sense of belonging, something she had never felt. One evening, after a family dinner filled with quiet murmurs and forced smiles, Mara overheard her brothers talking in the courtyard. She should be taught a lesson, her eldest brother said, a smirk on his face. Send her to Tomas, see if she can do anything out there. She's useless, her other brother laughed. A good joke for the village. Imagine her returning, proving nothing. Mara's heart sank. She knew what they meant. Old Tomas was a rancher who lived miles away, in a place the villagers called the Wild Edge. He was known for being solitary, fierce, and unwilling to take any woman seriously. The idea of sending Mara there was meant to humiliate her, to prove she was indeed unworthy. The next morning, Mara's family gathered her in the kitchen. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes avoiding Mara's. Her father's voice was gruff, tinged with impatience. We've arranged for you to go to Tomas's ranch. It's an opportunity, a trial. Maybe he'll take you in. Maybe you'll find your place there. Mara knew better. They weren't offering her opportunity, they were sending her away as a spectacle, a failure to laugh about. The weight of their words crushed her spirit. She wanted to speak, to protest, but the silence of the kitchen was heavier than any argument. She was given a small bag, a change of clothes, and a last glance filled with pity and amusement. The journey to the ranch was long. Mara rode a battered mule across dry plains and narrow dirt roads. The air smelled of dust and wild grass. As she approached the ranch, the wind carried the distant sounds of cattle lowing and the creak of wooden gates. She felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She was going to face old Tomas, the man who everyone in the village said was too stubborn to care for anyone but his land. The ranch was unlike anything Mara had known. It was rough and sprawling, with weathered wooden fences, grazing cattle, and barns that smelled of hay and earth. Tomas stood near the corral, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the evening sky. His face was lined and weathered, his eyes sharp as steel. He regarded her quietly as she approached. Here for work, he asked, his voice low and gravelly. There was no warmth, no smile, just the matter-of-fact tone of a man who didn't bother with pleasantries. Mara hesitated, unsure what to say. "My family sent me," she replied softly. Tomas nodded once, as if that explained everything. "Well, we'll see what you've got." She was given a small cabin at the edge of the ranch, barely more than a shelter. The first night, Mara lay on a thin mattress listening to the sounds of the land, the low hum of insects, the rustling of the wind, and the distant bellow of cattle. She felt small and exposed. But for the first time in her life, she also felt something else, the stirrings of determination. Life at the ranch was harsher than Mara could have imagined. The mornings began before dawn, when the air was still cold and thick with dew. Tomas would already be in the fields, the sound of his boots crunching on gravel carrying far across the open land. Mara learned quickly that there was no time for complaints here. Every moment had to be filled with work, mending fences, hauling hay, tending to the cattle, cleaning the barns. The first days were grueling. Mara's hands blistered and ached, her muscles protested, and she stumbled more than once trying to keep pace. Tomas rarely gave instructions, he simply pointed or gestured, and Mara figured things out by watching him. At first, she felt humiliated. This was the test her family had set for her, their cruel idea of proving her worthlessness. But with each day, something began to shift inside her. She stopped counting hours and started counting small victories, fixing a fence without his help, calming a restless calf, carrying a heavy bale of hay on her own. Tomas never praised her, but Mara noticed him watching her work. Sometimes his gaze was quiet, almost unreadable, but there was something in it, an acknowledgement that went deeper than words. She began to wonder if he, too, had learned to see her differently. The ranch itself was a world apart. There were moments of brutal labor, but also moments of quiet beauty. Mara learned to wake before the sun just to see the light spill across the fields. She watched storms sweep over the land, lightning illuminating the dark horizon. She listened to the low hum of cattle, the songs of crickets at night, the distant howl of coyotes. Slowly, she began to feel a strange sense of belonging. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Tomas asked her to help bring in the cattle. They worked together in silence, moving as if guided by an unspoken rhythm. The air was warm with the smell of hay and earth. Mara wiped sweat from her brow, and Tomas, without speaking, handed her a water skin. For the first time, she noticed something different in his demeanor. That night, she sat by the cabin's small fire, cleaning her tools. Tomas was nearby, leaning against a post, watching the flames flicker. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, without looking at her, he said, "You've got grit. Not many would last here." Mara blinked in surprise. "Is that a compliment?" she asked softly. He grunted, not looking her way. "Call it what you want. Fact is, you've stayed." The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Mara's body grew stronger, her hands tougher, her spirit steadier. She began to speak less of her family's ridicule and more of her own discoveries, like learning to ride Tomas's old horse without falling, or finding hidden trails through the nearby hills. Then came one night when everything shifted. The ranch was quiet under a sky bursting with stars. Mara was sitting outside the cabin, her knees pulled close to her chest, when she noticed Tomas standing at the corral gate. He wasn't speaking, just watching her. There was an intensity in his gaze, something Mara couldn't decipher. She felt her heartbeat quicken. "Why do you stare so?" she asked finally. Tomas's eyes didn't leave hers. "You've changed," he said simply. "You came here to prove nothing. And you've proven something anyway." Mara didn't know how to answer. She felt a strange warmth rising in her chest. Something unspoken lingered between them, something fragile yet undeniable. From that night on, their relationship shifted subtly. Tomas was still silent in many ways, but there was a softness in his manner she hadn't seen before. Mara began to feel that the ranch wasn't just a place to prove herself, it was a place that was reshaping her. And deep down, she wondered if Tomas was changing too. They were both keeping something unspoken. Mara didn't know what it was, but the ranch was no longer just a trial, it had become a turning point in her life. When Mara finally returned to her village, she felt the weight of months behind her, months that had shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. The road back was long, but it was not just the distance she traveled, it was the journey of transformation she carried with her. Her shoulders were stronger, her eyes steadier, and in her heart was a quiet certainty. The village was as she had left it, dusty streets, clusters of children playing, women gossiping at the well, the faint scent of bread drifting from a nearby oven. But Mara's return was not quiet. News spread fast, faster than she expected. They knew she was coming back from the rancher. And they had 100 assumptions about what that would mean. When Mara stepped into the village square, people paused. They stared, mothers stopped their children, shopkeepers leaned out of doorways, and whispers rose like a tide. Her family was waiting at the edge of the square, a mixture of curiosity and smugness in their expressions. They thought they were about to see the result of their cruel joke, a broken woman returning in disgrace. But Mara did not return alone. She came holding something far more powerful than their laughter, a child. The moment she stepped forward, the crowd fell silent. It was impossible not to notice her daughter, a little girl with soft curls the color of chestnuts, eyes bright with life. She clung to Mara's hand, giggling quietly, as though she knew she belonged to a world far bigger than this one. Mara walked with quiet confidence, her child cradled protectively. Her mother gasped. Her brothers froze. The laughter that had once followed Mara's name was gone, replaced by a stunned hush. Mara stopped before them, her face calm, her voice steady. "This is my daughter," she said simply. "And she is proof that your words were wrong." A silence fell over the square. Mara's father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Her brothers exchanged glances, their smirks gone, replaced with uncertainty. Mara's mother stepped forward, her eyes glistening, not with pride, but with something heavier. Mara ignored them. She did not need their approval. The village had sent her away as a joke, believing she would return humiliated, proving her family's cruelty right. But Mara had not returned broken. She had returned stronger, and she carried with her a life that no one could mock or diminish. The little girl tugged at Mara's hand, looking up at her mother with innocent eyes. Mara smiled softly and bent down to whisper something. Tomas's name slipped from her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the man who had changed her life. He had been her anchor, her teacher, and something she had never expected, her partner. But the village had not seen Tomas. They only saw Mara, and she knew she did not need to explain. Her story was written in her child's smile, in the confident way she walked, and in the undeniable truth she carried. She had the last word, without saying another thing. From that day forward, Mara's life changed forever. Her family never mocked her again. In fact, they avoided speaking of her entirely, as though she existed now in a different world. Mara never returned to her old home. She stayed at the ranch, raising her daughter with Tomas. Their lives were not easy, there was still hard work, long days, and the struggles of ranch life, but Mara never again doubted herself. In the village, they whispered still, but the tone had changed. Mara's name was no longer spoken with derision. It was spoken with awe, curiosity, even respect. She had turned the cruel joke into her victory. Years later, Mara would sit on the porch of her cabin, her daughter playing at her feet, and look out across the rolling fields. The wind would carry the faint scent of hay and earth, and she would remember the day her family sent her away. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude.